I told you my story, you would hear hope that wouldn't let go. And if I told you my story, you would hear love that never gave up. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
These last few weeks have been so much fun, at least for me, to watch how God unfolds His story and how it worked out in your stories as well, watching some of the stories that people shared from the videos as well about how God's worked in their lives, in some cases brought Him to them, in some cases brought them back to Him and showing His faithfulness. But as we're watching these stories and hearing of God working in these stories, I'm not naive to the fact that there's going to be some of you who have been leaving these services or sitting through these times, though Pastor Dylan and Pastor Chuck have explained these things very well, you might be sitting here and leaving feeling frustrated, angry, in some cases just abandoned. Because although we're showing through the biblical story how God's been writing His story and writing our stories as well, you might be sitting at a point where you're halfway wondering, is God still writing my story? Did He drop His pen and can't find it? Does He have writer's block? You know what that is? When you wrote a paper for school, you had to write a story, and you sit down to start writing, and nothing happens. Or you get part way through, get to the next part of the story, and you can't even think of where to take it. Does God have writer's block? Did He get up for a cup of coffee or take a walk just to figure out what's next? Or maybe more discouraging is, have I so screwed up God's story with my life? He's not even sure right now how He's going to make it right. Or maybe even more terrifying, with all these pages I feel like are still unwritten, is God done writing my story? That's frustrating. 10 years ago, I was sitting at Chipotle in Pasadena, California. I started 10 years ago back to get another degree. I did all my reading at home. I did all my writing at home. But every November, I'd fly to Pasadena, California to the campus of the seminary for 2 weeks of intensives. I'm telling you, Ohio in November, Pasadena in November, it was rough. But we would sit through classes from 8 a.m. till about 3:30 in the afternoon, and we'd do lunch together every now and then. The 10 classmates, a professor and myself, and that one day we went to Chipotle down on Lake Avenue, and while I was sitting there, I got an email. It was actually my brother's mother-in-law who worked at a college. She emailed me and said, "Hey, Bo, I just want you to know that one of our professors is retiring, and they want to fill it with a full-time youth ministry teacher, which they've never had before at our school. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're going back for your doctorate, right? Would you be interested in this kind of job? If so, just want to give you a heads up to maybe go ahead and put your resume in." I don't even know what I ordered at Chipotle that day because my mind was gone. That was an exciting prospect. I hadn't thought about teaching. So I actually called my wife, who was still at home for that 2 weeks, and I said, "Hey, Nicole, I got this email. It seems pretty interesting." She said, "Well, Bo, do you remember, I don't know if you remember, but back in college, you told me maybe someday you'd be interested in teaching new pastors." This is all lining up. This is so great. I couldn't believe it. It's like God opened this up, this new door, and said, get ready to walk through. I'm going to start you on a trajectory to being a youth ministry professor. I was so excited. So I started working on my resume that week and got rejected. But I kept knocking on the door. and keep getting rejected. See, what also happened at that time, right when that was going on, Nicole and I were about to start into our most difficult 4 to 5 year stint of ministry. There were still good things happening at that church, but it was hard. So when you're discouraged somewhere else, you're always looking to what's next. And so that even escalated my discontentment. I was sending out resumes, but that was just different rejection reasons. It was not the right time. It was not the right denomination. You have the wrong degree. You don't have any teaching experience. To which I wanted to say, I can't get experience if you don't give me experience. I went from knocking on the door to banging my head against the door. Getting more and more frustrated, more and more discouraged, more and more discontent. We moved here to Dayspring. And even though good things were happening here, I was still looking for that door to open. I finally got my foot in the door teaching online at Wesley Seminary. I actually 2 years ago got invited to go teach one night from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night, a night class at Mount Vernon Nazarene. Torture. 20-year-olds from 6 to 9, I have a hard time staying awake, much less keeping them awake. That was all great, but it still wasn't that full-time role. I felt like God had turned the page, was getting to write something exciting, but then he just dropped the pen or something. 9 years. And still banging my head against the wall, the door. It's not making sense. Felt like he was up to something. But did God get writer's block? Did God forget that he was writing my story? Or did he just quit writing this part of the story? And it just led to levels of discontentment, frustrating, and anger toward him. And all the while, things were deteriorating at my house. Because I'm working 45 to 60 hours here at church. I have a wife now of almost 19 years. I have 4 kids whose schedules, the older they get, the busier they get. I'm teaching an online class, a night class, and I'm frying. And I'm not being a very good dad. I'm not being a very good listening husband. Got to the place I was so discontent at one point, I even put a resume in, didn't tell my wife. And she wasn't too happy about that. Because the whole time she's wondering, when's the next shoe going to fall? When are we going to up and leave again? So the tension built in our home. It felt like God had started to write a chapter and just put his pen down. The Bible is full of texts, full of verses, full of stories that remind us, that show us that God's up to something. He's always there, always working. There's a list of them in your worship, on your sermon notes. There'll be a list up here too. I'll just read a few of them. Deuteronomy 31:6, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you, never forsake you. John 13:7, Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you understand. That doesn't help. Matthew 28:20, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. John 5:17, Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I myself am working. Philippians 1:6, for I'm confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. The Bible shows us that God is constantly working. The Bible shows us that God is constantly writing his story. But when we get in moments in our life, we have to ask ourselves this question, because is God still writing my story? Am I still part of what he's doing? Was I in chapter 25, but I'm not coming back till chapter 28? Or has he totally written me out of this novel called The Existence of the World? One of the most epic stories written in the Bible is this guy named Samson, who was the strongest man ever. I'm not talking American Gladiator strong. I'm not talking world's strongest man, Magnus Ver Magnusson strong. TV show I used to watch as a kid where he would flip tires and put a harness on and pull semis. I don't mean that strong. I mean supernaturally infused with the power of God, physically strong. His story compared to this guy's story, they're not even on the same page. Samson was born to a lady who couldn't have kids. Kept praying for children. God said, okay, I'll let you have a son. One condition though. When he's born, from the time he's born, you cannot cut his hair. Fair enough, I'd have the kid then. So as Samson grew up, his hair grew down and he grew stronger. There's a story of him pursuing this lady he really liked. He was going to go visit her, and on the way, he's attacked by a lion. And he takes that lion and tears him apart with his bare hands. He had a way with people, a bad way with people. He made them mad a lot of times. And one time, 30 men come and attack him. Kills them all. Wow. He became the leader of Israel during a time where the Philistines were ruling their land rather oppressively. So to kind of stick it to the Philistines once, to kind of hurt them economically, he catches 300 fox and pairs them up, ties their tails together, takes a torch, sticks it between the tails where they're tied together, lights the torches of these 150 pairs of fox, and lets them run free through the fields, through the orchards, and through the olive groves, burning them down. How cool is that? I mean, not happening, but all those foxes? And one time he made the Philistines so angry that 1,000 men from the army came and attacked him. He killed every single one of them by himself with only the jawbone of a donkey as his weapon. Now, would you believe me if I told you that he had a bit of an ego? Got him a little bit of trouble. Found this lady named Delilah. Hey there, Delilah, I love you. Can I get to know you better? And she's like, okay, but she's a Philistine. That's a problem. So the Philistine guys come to Delilah. Can you help us figure out the source of this guy's strength? So she tries. And eventually, because he loves women, he eventually lets it slip. They sneak in one night and they shave off his hair. And this is how the story goes from that point. Judges 16:20-22. Then Delilah said, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before, and shake myself free. But he did not know, because his hair was cut, that the Lord had left him, and so his strength had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Samson, the strongest man ever, had been reduced to a blind, frail, weak man in prison doing nothing but having his arms chained to this wooden pole where he'd walk around the mill day after day grinding grain. God had been writing this great story in Samson, and now he's been reduced to walking in circles day after day, grinding grain. You've heard part of my story. Maybe you've been there too. You feel a little blind to what God is doing. In fact, it looks like God's doing nothing. He dropped the pen. He's taken a break. And you're down here working as hard as you can to figure him out, figure things out. And you're stuck in a prison all by yourself, blind, walking in circles day after day, grinding grain, wonder what in the world has God up to? walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, and you're still stuck at that same job. Walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, and you still can't get away from living paycheck to paycheck. You're loving on your kids, raising your kids, but it feels like walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain because they just don't listen and they're making horrible choices. You've seen prayers answered and you keep praying, but now it feels like you're walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, still throwing up prayers, but now nothing's coming back from God. Your body starts to give out, your health starts to fail, and now it feels like life is walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, whether or not thinking God can even use you anymore. What good am I to the church, to society, to my family? Is he done with me? You're incredibly gifted. You know it, but no one seems to notice. No one seems to listen. It's just that you're walking in circles day after day, grinding your grain, and can't get a break anywhere. You fell into the pill, porn, alcohol, sex addiction pit, and now you're trying to get out, but it feels like you're just walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, and nothing is changing. You're pursuing your spouse, but it feels like you're walking in circles, grinding the grain day after day, because the closer you try to get, the further they pull away. And his pen does not seem to work. God appears to have taken a break from your story. Now, if you have kids, you'll get this next part. My 16-year-old's in the middle of a growth spurt right now, which finally, okay? He's in the middle of a growth spurt, and when you're around the kid, I mean, you're growing like millimeter by millimeter. It's not much. Well, a few weeks ago, my parents came to see him at a concert, and my dad looks at him and goes, "Man, Bryson, you have grown." And I think to myself right away, no, he hasn't. And then he said, "Bryson, stand by your grandma." And they're back to back. I'm like, man, he has grown. See, for me who watches him day after day, it's millimeter by millimeter growth. But when you don't see someone for a few months, it's inches by inches. And it does look like a lot. See, here's the part of the story that we miss when we think about Samson. Eyes gouged out, walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain. Verse 22, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. If we are going to trust what the Bible says, that God is still working, he's still writing, then what we have here is plot building. He's still developing things. My favorite show of all time was the show 24. Ran from like 2001 to 2010. It was a guy named Jack Bauer, and every season was 24 episodes. Every episode was 1 hour in that day. Jack Bauer had bad days. Every day was terrorists attacking, bombs going off. The worst part was his daughter. She was dumb. Now, I have 2 teen girls. I'm not saying teen girls are dumb, but Kim Bauer, she was dumb. If there was a little panel with a red button and said, "Do not touch," she'd be the one to walk in and say, "What's this button do?" And she'd push it. You knew whenever she showed up, something bad was going to happen. But the great part about the show was you'd sit down at 9 o'clock to watch the show, and right away it was like this infusion of adrenaline just shot through your body because something happened right away. And at the end of every episode, something bad happened, but you don't know how it turned out. And we had to wait 6 days and 23 long hours till you find out how Jack solved this problem. But every now and then there was an episode where nothing really happened. It was just boring. Nothing blew up. No one got questioned forcefully. What a waste. You go to a movie, and there are movies that'll happen that way too. For about 30 minutes, it's like, this is slow, nothing's happening. And then the action happens. That's called plot building. In that one episode, the writer was setting up things that were to come. Maybe there was a new character that came into the show, and they had to explain that character and their background a little bit to help make sense of what's happening next. Maybe there's something coming down the pike in the story, but they got to set up a new theory, a new theme, so that one or two shows later, it will all make sense. The plot building part of the story is as important as the whole story to make sense of what the writer is trying to communicate. But as you're sitting there watching those episodes, every now and then you're like, I want something to happen here. Wake me up a bit. Give me Samson tearing up a lion. Give me Samson killing 30 men or 1,000 soldiers. Give me him tying up foxes and sending them out into the fields. I want some action. I want some action in my life. And isn't it any wonder when you think about the world we live in right now why we feel that way? Because I can get a full course meal in 2 minutes with a microwave now. I don't have to wait for the postal service. I can send mail by pushing send on my computer, and it's there right away. If I want to hear some music, I don't have to drive to a music store and buy a cassette or a CD or wait for it to come in the mail. I can just grab my phone and download it, and I've got it. Or use YouTube and get it for free right away. I can go to Amazon and have what I want in 2 days. It's frustrating, is that Amazon does it better sometimes than we feel God does. Huh. And when God doesn't seem to deliver as fast as everything else in my world delivers, I get frustrated. I get angry. I get discouraged. But these slower episodes were vital to the TV show. They were plot-building episodes to set up what was next. Plot building helps to make sense of the whole story. Helps us understand where we've been. Helps us understand maybe where we're going. And many times, when God is plot building, it's not just the story he's developing, it's you he's developing. God might be, through this season of quietness and darkness and loneliness when it comes to our relationship with God, when the pen doesn't seem to be moving, God might actually be rebuilding us or building our faith. See, you might be in this season, in this dark story because of a choice that you made. And God's not sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with this? But he's taking the time to rebuild your character, to rebuild your mind so that you can restore the story that you messed up. But for everyone who messes up their own story, there are many people as well who have nothing to do with why there's darkness, have nothing to do why there's loneliness, have nothing to do with why they feel abandoned and hurt right now. But it's in those moments where God might very well be building your faith because of what he's about to write next. As far as these dark, lonely, frustrating times go, sometimes God uses those, like with Samson, we're going to see, to strengthen our ability to listen. it's no mystery that some of the best hearers are blind people. Because whenever you lose a sense, the other senses are heightened in their sensitivity. I'm a better listener to my wife when I don't have my phone or watching or the TV's on. When do you hear the creepy creaking noises in your house? When the lights are out. Because your senses are intensified. They're heightened. When things are most difficult, that's when we turn to God the most. God has answers to some questions that we've been asking. He just needs us to shut up enough to hear them sometimes, or to need him enough to reach out to him, because he's got a lot of answers to questions many of us have not ever asked that we may need to know. And he uses these painful, dark times to get us to listen. Now listen, I want you to hear me out. I'm not saying he promises you're going to like them. I'm not saying that they're going to be fair. What I am saying is I'm choosing to trust that on the other side of them, I'll love him more than when I did at the first. God also might be using these plot buildings to develop the story. Let me go further now and show you how the story of Samson ends. Starting at verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemies into our hands, the one who laid waste to our land and multiplied our slain." While they were in high spirits, they shouted, "Bring Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Can you put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I may lean on them?" Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, and bracing himself against them, his right hand to one side and his left hand on the other, Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple and all the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. God used this plot building to build Samson's strength, to give him the ability to take down a whole temple with his hands. And likewise, his faith had been built. This is the one time in the whole narrative of Samson where he actually calls out to God, where he actually looks to God. This is also a time where Samson became a better listener. He was probably led out naked before this whole crowd. No doubt heard them calling, his heightened hearing senses. No doubt heard them laughing and jeering, maybe throwing things at him. He could have stood there and moped. But he noticed it was a time of opportunity. He saw where God was placing him to accomplish what he was there for. He heard him. And do you see how God built the storyline all this time? It's not every day that all the rulers of the Philistines are together. It's not every day that 3,000 people gather at one place. God was aligning the time where Samson's strength physically and his faith and his ability to listen were all aligned with this massive gathering. His faith and strength, his faith and body are strong, and this moment is there, and he listens. And in that one time at his death, killed more Philistines than in his whole life combined. That leaves us with one last question. How long will this last? I'll know. I know your hair grows a ½ inch a month. So for Samson to go from bald to getting a long hair back couldn't have been days, couldn't have been weeks. And you think about the fact that these people shaved his head, they knew his hair had something to do with his strength, would lead this guy with a big flowing mane out in front of everybody. They had to have forgotten that this hair was the source of his strength. So we might be talking months, if not years, of walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain until this moment came together. Months, if not years, of frustration and darkness. Jesus, before he went and started his ministry of teaching and miracles, after he was baptized, was in the desert for 40 days without food or drink, being tempted by the great Satan himself before he began doing all these great things that changed the world. Joseph in Genesis was accused of rape falsely, was imprisoned. It says in the Bible for at least 2 years he was in prison for being falsely accused of rape until he became the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. After his conversion experience, the Apostle Paul, it says in one little passage in Galatians, he left for 3 years to Arabia. What's in Arabia? Desert. For 3 years he left before he ever became the greatest missionary to launch the church movement in the course of Christian history. 3 years of nothing. When he was 13 to 15 years old, David was anointed to be the next king of Israel, and he had to wait 15 to 20 years before before King Saul died. He even had chances to kill Saul, but he recognized that's the Lord's anointed, and when it's my time, I will be the next Lord anointed to take the throne. I know how impatient my teenagers are. He waited 15 to 20 years to fulfill the calling that he knew was on his life. And most of that 15 to 20 years, he was running for his life, living in caves, fearful that the king of Israel would kill him. After the incredible events of the Exodus, where Moses freed Israel from Egypt and they walked across dry land on the Red Sea, they waited 40 years before they could go into the promised land. Here's the most interesting part. Most of those people died before they went, except for Joshua and Caleb. 2 guys who saw the Exodus lived 40 years before they could get into the promised land, wandering around in a desert. Abraham waited 100 years to have his first child with his wife. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I choose to trust that it will end. For 9 years, I went from banging my hand against the door to banging my head against the door to realizing that I was banging my head against a brick wall with a door painted on it. It's a door that was never going to open. I was getting discontent. I was getting frustrated. And then I preached a sermon last fall on Sabbath, on rest. And God showed me, Bo, you're burning out. You're working 45 to 60 hours. You're not a good husband. You're not a good son. You're not a good father. You need to stop this. This is my dream. No, this is the dream you gave me 10 years ago, 9 years ago, 2009 in Pasadena, California, November. You sent me that email. You put a door there. You painted a door on a brick wall that was never going to open. You said, you got to stop. You got to slow down. In January, 2 months after preaching on taking rest and Sabbath, I get an invitation to go back to Mount Vernon and teach for another year. And I knew God was saying no. So I sat there in my green chair by the fireplace with that email in front of me, and I typed out an email saying I declined. I sat there taking a bunch of deep breaths as I was sending that email. I didn't want to send it. I was hoping God would say stop. Just wanted to see if you were willing to give it up. He never said stop. The moment I hit send, I promise you, I could breathe. My whole body relaxed because I was free. During that season of discontent, during that time, our marriage was hurting. I was actually on Facebook. You don't unfriend people because they can see that. I was unfollowing my peers who were professors because of all the great opportunities. I was so jealous. I couldn't even read what God was doing in their lives. But the moment I hit send was the moment I was free. And I promise you, at that moment, in that few weeks that followed, God started saying to me, you've been praying all this time this way, looking for that. And the minute I let go, I was able to see everything God was doing right in front of me. And I promise you, church, for the first time since I've been here, and for the first time in 9 years, my wife sat right there first service. She was nodding. For the first time in 9 years, I am content. Not passive, not like, I give up. Nah, I'm fine with what God is doing now. Because that 9 years, it took 9 years for God to show me this. Your job does not define you. Your success as a pastor or preacher or teacher has nothing to do with my value in you as far as I see it. You are valuable because you are mine. And it took me 9 years and about 2 months to get it. All that time, walking in circles, grinding the grain day after day, feeling like nothing is happening, nothing is moving. So we don't know when it's going to end. I encourage you to just choose to trust that it will. And in the meantime, keep walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain. And notice that your scalp will start to itch as that hair starts to grow. Walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, and feel a little bit starting to lay on your ears. And walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, blow it out of your eyes. Walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, and now you can feel the hair start to tickle your neck. Walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain, noticing all of a sudden, hey, this isn't as hard as it used to be. Walking in circles day after day, grinding the grain. the prison door opens. It's the Philistines. And your story is about to get real interesting.
Praising my Savior all the day long.